Is that a Christmas tree already up at your house?
No comment.
Way to get on it early, brother. Ron, good to see you.
Good to see you.
That's the Christmas tree song. Sorry, I think it's funny. I never knew.
It takes a while to get it put together. It's not small.
All right, everyone will be auditing the meeting. Thank you.
Way to get into the spirit, Sean. I like it.
Thank you.
You been to Costco at all lately?
It's all
No.
Christmas.
All right, so it is 6 o'clock and it is Tuesday, November 16th. And this is going to be a city council workshop of the city of Lake Stevens. And it will be held virtual only via Zoom. And so I will hand the time over to Council President Daughtry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good to see everybody tonight. We have 3 things on our agenda, as you all know, probably looking at it. The first one will be the management of single-family residential private stormwater infrastructure. Aaron, and welcome, Shannon. It's nice to see you again. And oh, there's Aaron. I saw him this morning, though, so. You're on. Go ahead.
Hey, thank you, Councilmember Daughtry. Good evening, council members and mayor. We are here to discuss our private stormwater pond maintenance conundrum, for lack of a better word. And we're interested in sharing our 2022 approach. And I'm going to pass it off to Shannon, the lead on this project. Take it away, Shannon.
Okay, so I just want to start off by giving a little bit of background on where this requirement is coming from and why we have a management strategy and why we're kind of seeking some discussion for a possible future management strategy. The city has coverage under what's called the Npds Municipal Stormwater Permit, and it's a permit that is issued to us by the Department of Ecology in the state of Washington, but it's really handed down from the Federal Clean Water Act. And under this permit, we have different stipulations and regulations on how we manage stormwater within our city. One of the provisions under the permit is the management of stormwater facilities. And in particular tonight, we're talking about single-family residential private stormwater facilities. When a single-family residential development is developed, we can call that, we'll define it as a subdivision. They have a common stormwater management system that is shared by all of the residential homes within that subdivision. That common stormwater management facility is used to treat stormwater before it's released and also manage flow. An increase in impervious surface from the development increases the amount of stormwater flow. So these facilities help control the amount of flow so that it's not released, resulting in downstream flooding. These facilities do need to be maintained regularly, and without proper maintenance, you have water quality issues and water control flow issues. Tonight, and Aaron has a pretty good visual that kind of represents the different scenarios that we've been seeing here in the city. So when we talk about these private stormwater facilities, these are not city-owned or managed facilities. In the dedication on the final plat, there's typically language that states that these facilities are the equal responsibility of each of the homeowners within that subdivision. So since the city is not, they do not maintain these facilities, but it still falls within our jurisdiction of managing our Npds permit and managing water quality and quantity within our city. So we do inspections of these facilities and then notify typically homeowners associations when maintenance is needed. Something that we've run into is subdivisions where an HOA is not active or was never created. And so instead of contacting one entity where homeowners pay into for common facility maintenance, we end up having just single family residents that we're having to contact individually to notify them that maintenance is needed on this common facility. And it's been a little bit problematic, especially in the case where some of these facilities haven't been maintained in 15 to 20 years. And so they do require quite a bit of maintenance. In order to stay in compliance with our NPDES permit, the city really does need to take action. And our current strategy right now is to do the inspection, send a series of letters to the homeowners, notifying them of the maintenance needs and requesting that they perform that maintenance to the appropriate standards. But there hasn't really been any follow-up aside from that. In some cases, we do get homeowners that are able to gather and perform the maintenance needed. And in particular with the homeowners associations, we don't have as much issue with getting them to comply with the maintenance standards. In our municipal code, we do have language that outlines the ability for the city to go into these residential stormwater facilities that do not comply with maintenance standards and do not have a plan to comply with it, and actually perform the maintenance and then bill the individual homeowners for the cost of that maintenance. To date, we have not utilized that mechanism for performing the maintenance and recouping the cost of it. But in order to be in compliance with our NPDES permit, we are proposing to utilize that mechanism moving forward in 2022. So we would still continue to do the inspections, notify the homeowners, provide as much education as we can and guidance for conducting that maintenance. But ultimately, if the maintenance is unable to be performed, the city would go in and maintain it and then bill individual homeowners accordingly. We have been working with the Conservation District to do some education and outreach, specifically around detention ponds. Earlier this year, we did a webinar for homeowners so that they could learn what a detention pond is and how it's maintained, to hopefully just get people more aware of what these are and the importance of the maintenance. We have reached out to several other jurisdictions, and some of them have the same mechanism, this enforcement mechanism of doing the maintenance themselves and then billing the individual homeowners. Some of them have taken over the ponds, and some of them kind of do a hybrid approach. And so that's really the start of this topic of discussion. Is right now the mechanism that we have is to continue our current practice of notification and education, but then as an enforcement mechanism to do the work and bill them. And that's what we'll be doing in 2022. But if council decides that we want to start looking at some of these other options and maybe start exploring the possibility of a different management technique similar to some of these other jurisdictions, then we will need to gather some more data to be able to make that an adequate decision based on whatever kind of guidance that you're going to give us today on what path we want to move forward with. So I'll kind of open that up to questions and discussion, or if Aaron, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, can I jump in? Let's go back here really quickly. So yeah. Shannon, you mentioned that some of these ponds or these stormwater facilities, I don't think pond is the right term, haven't been maintained in perhaps decades. Some of these HOAs don't know they exist. Many of them don't know that they're responsible for their maintenance. They may be the third owner of that home, and they just don't know.
Correct.
Why it's important is the NPDES permit, which we're trying to get back into compliance with, requires us to ensure these HOAs maintain these ponds, or actually just to make sure these ponds are maintained. They don't really care how we do it. So for us to do that, we have a mechanism in our code, and Shannon mentioned it, where we can go inspect, send them a series of letters, them being the HOA or the individual homeowners, if there is no HOA. And if they don't do the maintenance in a certain period of time, we would go in to the pond with a contractor, maintain it, take the invoice, pay the invoice, bill the HOA or the individual homeowners. It would be cumbersome, but it would achieve compliance with the NPDES permit. So the way we see it, there are 4 scenarios for this in terms of ponds. Inactive HOA with no pond maintenance. I suspect that's the most common scenario, especially in some of these older subdivisions. An active HOA with no pond maintenance. Maybe the HOA only maintains their park or some of their common spaces, but they've not maintained the pond because it's expensive or it fell off their list, fell out of their consciousness. Active HOA where they do pond maintenance and they gather HOA dues to do that pond maintenance. So they're essentially taxing themselves to do this maintenance. And there's the uncommon scenario where you would have an inactive HOA, but somehow someone in the neighborhood would be doing the pond maintenance, or they would be getting together as a community and doing it. So I mentioned that we have an option within our code to get the job done. It's going to be uncomfortable, perhaps. I think that the council and the mayor, and we will certainly hear about it when we start sending bills out to these individual homeowners for maintenance. So Shannon mentioned, we explored several options, looked at what other jurisdictions do. In some cases, for instance, Snohomish County, they just do the maintenance. As money becomes available, the county goes and does the maintenance on these ponds. And others have a hybrid approach where they educate and encourage and try to get compliance and deal with it administratively in a carrot method rather than a stick method. So that summarizes that. Now, if we were to go and try to assess and look at the gaps in data, we don't necessarily know where all of these facilities are. We don't know how many we have. So that's a data gap, and we have to work on that. We don't know the status of the HOAs. We don't know the condition of the maintenance generally. For some, we do. It could be incredibly expensive if the city were to take it on and do the maintenance. So I would think it would take an analysis of our rates and getting access or rights to these ponds, gaining the rights necessary to maintain these ponds in a way that deviates from the city's municipal code would require some legal review and perhaps an amendment to the municipal code. I think that's anything else, Shannon?
No, that pretty much sums it up. I mean, really to be able to make a decision what an alternative management strategy would be, we really do need some additional data to determine what we have, what is the condition of the facilities, and how would we financially take that over to maintain it.
Okay. With that, it looks like we have Angie with her hand up.
Hello, thank you. This is great information. I do remember we've had several conversations about this over the last couple of years or so. So I'm glad that we're at a point where we're finally going to perhaps make a decision. I have a couple of questions.
Mm-hmm.
You had mentioned the plan would be to send a series of letters, and then if there was no action, the city would step in and do the work and bill the HOA or the tenants. Can you give me a sense of what the timeline would be from the first letter sent to when the city would actually step in and do the work?
Yeah, so currently right now we send, what has been done in the past is one letter has been sent notifying of the inspection and the maintenance needs that need to be done. 30 days later, a second letter is sent that basically states after 30 days, the city will make a plan to come in and do the maintenance if we do not get any kind of correspondence from the homeowners. So I do have one subdivision in particular where we went out and we did an inspection. We sent one letter to the individual homeowners. We got a very large response from the homeowners. Particularly, they didn't actually know that the pond was there, nor did they realize it was their responsibility. And so we came out, we met on site, and we did more of like an informational conversation about it. I've also set up a meeting with the conservation district to come out and talk with the individual homeowners about what kind of maintenance actually needs to be done, what kind of pond it is, and just giving some more education. So I think, in my personal opinion, we would send these letters, but if homeowners are willing to do the work themselves and they want to, we do have tools that we can use and information out there in the conservation district we can use as a reference and resource to provide them with the information they need to actually get to the goal of maintenance.
Yes.
Well, I think, let me say that I think that we will give them the chance. We will give them 2 letters. If they don't do it, we will, in the second letter, warn them that we are going to do the maintenance and give them a deadline, perhaps 3 months in the future, something like that. We'll set a policy. And once we've passed that deadline, we will go do the maintenance. So that could be from first notification, it could be up to 6 months. I'd
Okay,
say.
that makes sense. And then has there been any work done or analysis done to look and see if the HOA like hires someone to do the work and pays that versus the city doing the work and paying that bill? Is the city bill more expensive or less expensive or about the same?
The city bill is more expensive. So the range, I think good educated guess is 5,000 to up to 30,000 for maintenance of some of these facilities.
Mhm.
If they're
That the city would charge?
So what we would do, what I propose we do is we have a contractor on call to do this work. We would have to pay them prevailing wages, which is more expensive than
Right.
a private contractor, a contractor hired by a private party. But yeah, I think it would be more expensive if the city does the maintenance. That's generally true.
Sure. Okay. And then my last question, is there an opportunity, let's say, I think the scenario that you described, it seems likely that either, the HOA had no idea it was there, or they didn't see it as something that was sort of under their umbrella of something. But let's say they haven't been collecting dues that allow them to pay for making it happen. Is there an opportunity to partner with the city and maybe make payments over time, or something where there isn't such a sudden financial burden on the HOA?
Not that I'm aware of. I can look into that. We can look into that.
Okay, just kind of thinking outside the box and realizing that may be a scenario. Great, thank you so much for your answers. I appreciate that.
If I could jump in there. So Angie, that we can set that up. We have the ability to set up payments. But it gets into another discussion of the expenses and time involved for city staff to collect payments, to send out notices of payment, to if people don't pay, notices of collection or liening their house. It just creates a lot of time and paperwork for staff to do that side of the collection side of that functioning, and it becomes problematic.
Sure, I totally see that.
Yeah.
I think that my worry is the flip side of that is you have an HOA with 15 or 16 homes and you have a $30,000 bill, and they don't have the money to pay that bill, and we need to get the work done, right? And so to figure out kind of a win-win situation, and I get that it's a burden on the city, but it's a pretty tremendous burden on those homeowners as well. And so maybe there's some sort of middle ground.
Yeah.
Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I realized was that Marysville and Snohomish County and Monroe, I don't know how much, Aaron, you've spoken with them to find out how it's working for them and what they have learned, because they're already doing this, and maybe they can give you some guidance. This definitely needs to happen. And yes, we have talked about this before. I don't know whether Marysville or Monroe have as much wetlands as we do and retention ponds, but I do think maybe they could guide us a little bit, and maybe you've already spoken to them, but I didn't hear you say that you did. That was my only comment.
Yeah, Mary, I can address that. So I have spoken with the stormwater coordinators in Marysville and Monroe and Snohomish County. And they do not have as many facilities as we do, first and foremost. Also, Marysville, their stormwater management utility rates do reflect them taking over, and they take over all of the new stormwater facilities. So all of the facilities that have been annexed into the city from the county, they actually do not maintain. So they do start with the maintenance of just new facilities where the cost of that is much lower than having this initial, maybe larger cost up front to maintain something that hasn't been maintained in 15, 20 years. One of the benefits of regular maintenance per the NPDES permit compliance is if you can show records of regular maintenance, you can reduce inspection schedules and maintenance schedules for those facilities if you can show an adequate number of records to support that. So that is something that has happened in Snohomish County. They are at a point now where they have been regularly maintaining these single-family residential facilities for so long that they're now able to show maintenance records and inspection records to actually reduce their inspection rate, which is going to kind of save them money with taking over these facilities. So it took them a long time to get there, but that's where they're at right now. So yeah, I think really what we would need to focus on is if that is something of interest to look at that path of management, we really do need to get a good handle on how many facilities we have, what is their current status as far as the infrastructure, and then what would that look like in terms of recouped payment to the city, and likely in the form of the stormwater management utility fee. The other, we also have the other scenario where there are active HOAs and people are paying dues to those HOAs who are performing the maintenance. So if the stormwater utility fee was increased, you'd almost have residents paying for twice for the same thing. If HOAs continue to collect the same amount of due and even perform the maintenance, or so those are just different scenarios that we'd have to look at, and that's kind of where this data gaps come into play. If we really do want to move to a different management strategy, we do need a lot more information.
Mary, to follow up, Shannon, great explanation. Shannon's very technical. She's really in the weeds on this. I really appreciate that. But I do think Shannon did reach out to them. I don't know if we have the data regarding compliance rates. It seems like we have some, but maybe not all. It's certainly worth a look, another look.
All right, Sean.
Yes, good evening, everybody, and thank you for the presentation, Shannon and Aaron. I appreciate everything that's been said. A couple of concerns. I think that as we look at even the current management strategy, we need to have good data on what all of the stormwater facilities are. I think it is challenging to begin billing individuals or HOAs without having a complete data set of what all these facilities are if they're going to be the ones maintaining them. I do wonder administratively if we start looking at all of once we have that data set, once we get to the point that we know these are how many facilities have to be maintained, if we looked at the actual maintenance, the actual administrative costs of oversight of multiple people. I don't know if we're talking about dozens or hundreds at this point, that the administrative costs might actually overtake those costs of paying the prevailing wage, and the city just move forward with a management program that allowed the city to maintain these facilities and not put that burden on the individual HOAs or individual homeowners. That would be my concern. But I think even if we do move forward with the current proposal, we need to have the full data set of the facilities before we would move forward, just to make sure that everybody was being notified and billed equitably.
Yeah, Councilmember Frederick, if I can follow up, we will gather that data. The city just recently annexed more area in Snohomish County. So we're trying to gather that data. We're trying to gather some of the older data from previous annexations. So we will gather that data and make sure it's equitable and that we have a good handle on it. We're not going to begin picking and choosing these facilities and cleaning them and not without a more holistic view of the issue, for sure.
That is greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Gary.
Thank you. Excuse me. Aaron, a lot of these existing facilities were brought in through annexations and so forth. And when the annexation occurs, we start assessing individual property owners for stormwater fee. How do we make the case to those folks that since you've been paying a stormwater fee for the last 5, 6, 8, 10 years, now we're going to assess them for something that they, and rightly, they probably should have been maintaining based on the covenants, but they haven't been. So how do you, as a constituent, comes to us and says, shoot, I've been paying a stormwater fee for the last 8 years. Now you're going to assess me $2,000 for the maintenance of this facility. How do we answer that question?
Well, I'll do my best, and then maybe Shannon can supplement my response.
Sure.
The stormwater fee pays for common facility maintenance. When I say common, I mean broadly, city facility maintenance, catch basins, roadways, curbs and gutters, culverts, things like that. These ponds serve neighborhoods only. So it's a little bit of a different system in terms of responsibility, or at least it's been treated that way historically. And perhaps the view has changed of that. But historically, these ponds were for neighborhoods and they were to be maintained by neighborhoods. And that agreement essentially is on their title. So it should come as no surprise to them. It will, but it shouldn't. That they're responsible for maintenance of these ponds.
Yeah, and I have had this question come up before, Gary. I've had homeowners ask me that exact question, and Aaron's correct. The way that the rate was calculated for these stormwater utility fees, it was last calculated in the adoption of the 2018 rate study. And it pays for common facilities and it pays for the maintenance of this overall permit. So our overall water quality and infrastructure here in the city, capital improvement projects to upgrade facilities and infrastructure needed to meet water quality and quantity standards. So it's more of a common, the commons is what that fee pays for, and not necessarily the individual facilities that go in just to serve those residential community that's in that neighborhood. Because you do have single family residents here in the city that don't have any common stormwater facilities. That they're still paying that same stormwater management utility fee, but their neighborhood doesn't have any stormwater facilities. I hope that answered a question.
Yeah, that helps. I'm sure we'll be posed with that question when we go down this road. I would add, though, that based on the rate study of 2018, though, we adopted an LOS 1, which was for the existing operation. That doesn't meet the Npds requirements. So I suppose an argument could be made that we're not in compliance from the get-go. So.
Okay, I'll have to take another look at that, Gary. I thought that we adopted LOS 3.
Well, high priority capital? I don't believe so.
Okay.
Based on the rates that we're collecting, which I guess that leads to another question. What is the annual rate that property owners are being assessed?
I do not know off the top of my head. It does change incrementally every year until 2024. Without giving you an exact number, it's somewhere around $235 annually.
235. Okay.
Yeah, and I can get you the exact number in the rate study. Let me bring it up right now. I think I have it.
So you're saying we did adopt LOS number 3, huh?
Yeah, and let me double check that. That's what I thought that we had adopted. So a residential single family home right now pays, in 2021, they pay $242 annually. And so next year it would go up to 250. 2023 would be 257, and 2024 would be 265.
Someone please define LOS.
So it's
Level of service.
Sorry, there were too many people talking at once.
All right, level of service.
And what is LOS 2 and LOS 3?
Yeah, so the level of service is what was defined in the 2018 rate study that links back to what kind of services that would be provided based on the rate study that was adopted. So I can actually, Angie, if you'd like, I could get you a table that defines the different levels of services based on that 2018 rate study.
That would be great. I don't know that I'm the only one that needs it, but I think just so that we're all on the same page and understand what's being referenced, that would be appreciated.
The other question I have, in looking at my notes, Shannon, you may be correct in that LOS 3. I was assuming it was the LOS 1. I guess I would comment, I guess the city of Lake Stevens is the ultimate holder of that permit and is the ultimate, I guess, line of defense in regards to implementing that permit. So I guess I would encourage the city to move down the road of taking these ponds over, because in my past experience, it's kind of a hodgepodge of maintenance that takes place. You may get some that are maintained very well, some that are just minimal, and then some that don't have a clue as to what they're doing, which cause even more problems for water quality. So I will tell you, in past experience, Marysville, when the Npds process was being implemented here a number of years ago, they were pushing back to having the, I take that back, they were dedicating the ponds to the city. The city didn't have the appropriate funding mechanism in place. They got to a point where they couldn't afford it, so they started having the HOAs formed and things of that sort. And then they were finding that none of them were getting maintained, or very little maintenance. And as recently as, excuse me, about 3 years ago, they re-implemented dedication to the city because of the problems with those maintenance issues. So I would, again, I would hope that the city would entertain incorporating or taking over these ponds that are in question, so that we can do these things appropriately to be in compliance, because clean water is definitely a huge issue in the environment, and is a very important issue to deal with. So thank you.
All right, thank you. Steve?
Thank you. I guess to Sean and to the mayor's point, my two concerns that I have, one, without appropriate data, I don't know that we can make, correct decisions, know where these 200 fall on those 4 pots before we can make accurate assessment. And then, just the sheer cost. If all 200 need the mid-range of 15,000, we're looking at $3 million of unfunded, stuff on the city. And then on top of that, the ability of the city to maintain that. And as Sean mentioned, maybe that the cost to administer this program might exceed the cost of actual maintenance that needs to get done. So I would also like if we can get information about the number of facilities that are being maintained or some quantifiable way, and then the money that they have for that, and the source of that money, that would kind of help see if there's any way other than just stormwater for us to do that. But I do appreciate the concerns that have been shared about imposing undue hardships on people, and being thoughtful and deliberate in addressing this concern in our city.
All right, so I'll do the last question. Shannon, I know you haven't been here very long, and Aaron just now took over the position that he is in also, but it was my understanding that we'd already started an inventory of all of the ponds. Where are we at on our inventory besides the newly annexed areas? Do we have a pretty good handle on what is real before annexation?
Yes, we have started the inventory. Through this detention pond webinar that we started at the beginning of this year, we have identified some ponds that we didn't even know about. So we have started the inventory. As far as the inspections of each of the individual private ponds, we are behind in those. So we do need a better work plan in place for 2022 to make sure that we're able to inspect it. We are looking at getting possibly another person for our surface water program to help with those inspections, so that we really do have a good idea of what the condition of these facilities, and then how many are actually being maintained and how many do fall within this category. Fall within this category of there's no HOA and there hasn't been any maintenance.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions, comments?
So I do have a question. When can we expect that inventory to be presented back to us, and the expected cost and timeline to carry out the maintenance in the event that none of the HOAs are in a position to maintain their ponds?
Why don't we have shoot for the end of first quarter 2022?
Okay, we'll shoot for that.
Okay.
All right, Mary, did you have a question?
I just wanted to recognize the hard work that Aaron and Shannon have been doing, and so many of our staff. This is a big challenge for you. And yes, Lake Stevens is wetter than anybody else. It's a fact. And it is a huge challenge, and I appreciate all the support everybody's given you. And so there you go, done.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and we'll see you next time. Good job, Shannon.
Thanks.
All right, the next action we have here is amending the budget. Let me get back on my home screen here. 2021 budget amendment number 2, Barb.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. So I'm going to kind of walk through this budget amendment for you. The majority of these have been discussed with council previously. So this was in your packet. Looking at this, I did put the amended lines grouped for review. The columns include the project, which is sort of a source and or use of the fund, of the funds, and then we have the fund and the fund number, the line item description, the type, whether it's a revenue or an expenditure, the amount of the amendment, and then some notes, and then the final column indicates if the amendment has been brought before council previously, or is a roll forward from prior year, or is a new adjustment that maybe has been discussed or maybe has not, and it's just clearing some budget issues. So the first lines we have here are individual operational changes. We have EASL, that's Liz Loomis Communications. That was something that we needed to bring forward into council. Obviously, we've been using her all year long, and we do have a contract in place for that. We just needed to put the budget in place. The next is the under judgment and settlements, L&I citation, you all know about. Refund reimbursement, I did mention this during an earlier presentation, that we have this refund of traffic mitigation that was collected in error in the prior year. We then have the annual maintenance increase for ClearGov. That is our transparency software that is on our website and includes the budget book, which we will be using to showcase our budget for 2022 once we have completed it. And then the other two are just clearing some funds. The 20th Street Southeast Fund, that was created solely for the purpose of accumulating funds from sale of specific properties on 20th that we annexed in from Snohomish County. And so that those funds have been used for the 20th Street project. So this is just clearing the fund, and that's no longer needed. And then the 540, that's the aerator fund. This will likely roll into 2022, and then will be a budget amendment there. But this also clears the fund for the work that we're doing. That's shared funding with Snohomish County and the city. And so we're just finishing utilizing that. The next section we have there in the brown is some grants. These are grants that we spent the money and sent in the reimbursements in 2020, and now we're actually receiving the revenues this year. So those are actually roll forwards from the prior year. That includes the CARES grant from Snohomish County, some 20th Street grant. They had increased our funding, which was great for that. The next one, the gray, that is our ARPA account, and it does account for the revenues and the expenditures that we passed during the resolution. This is the 2021 funding, so we received the 4.7 million. The 91st and 24th drainage, that was originally budgeted in the surface water management capital fund, but since we were able to use ARPA funds for it, this is reducing it out of that 411 fund. And so it doesn't actually increase the expenditures in the ARPA, as that was set for the full amount. The next one in peach, that's donation, counts for the revenues and the expenditures for donation that we received for the Spencer Memorial. This just allows us to go ahead and spend the funding. The next is legal. We had funds left over in our sewer fund that we were using for professional services, that we were using for attorney services. So we kind of changed some of those dollar amounts, increased them, and then any overage is coming out of the general legal line item. And so the next one, the purple, that is debt. That's related to the infrastructure bond for 24th and 91st. And so you have the fund 215, that is the bond fund. Shows the revenues being transferred in from the REIT fund, which pays for that bond debt service, and then the actual expenditures out for the principal, interest, and bond fees. I do have a reduction in the expenditure line item for transfer out from the REIT fund of 600,000. That was an estimate that we had put in place for 2021. Then once we actually got the bond information, 2021's payment was only interest, and so, or was less than, it was only about a half a year, and so that actually just decreased that. The next section in blue, these are law enforcement related purchases requested of council for taser and vehicle replacement. That's early purchase of 2022 equipment, and then also the body cameras. The next one in the orange, that's mill capital. The carpet included in there. That's the final payment for the carpet that we had installed. Storage trailer for the tables and chairs, all the extras that are in the hallway. And then there's money in here for blinds and also for a placeholder for the wireless mics. We're working on getting wireless mics so it doesn't take so long to set up and tear down council meetings. At this point, IT is working on getting quotes for that. And so we're looking at whether we can swing that in 2021 or we'll look at it in 2022. So any leftover funds there will move forward into 2022. And the blinds might come a little later as well, as obviously it's winter time. We don't have as much sun glaring into the windows right now, but it was pretty bad there a few of those days trying to see. So we definitely need to get some blinds on those windows. Then the next one is the public works shop remodel. This is contract amount with tax and change orders was increased by $165,000. The tax was calculated incorrectly, and then with change orders for getting the building up and going was an additional. That's coming out of the REIT fund, as we didn't want to take any more out of the general operating funds for that. The next one was the decant facility, and that was just accounting for the revenues from and related expenditures for the district's contribution to that. So that just increases both revenues and expenditures. And then the pink, the final, that's Mill Spur Festival Street. So the revenue is reduced. We reduced the capital, or I'm sorry, the revenue and the expenditure in the 305 fund. So that fund was created specifically for accumulation of money to go towards this project, yet we didn't actually sell the commercial property, so that money didn't actually come in. We were lucky enough to get a $2 million grant for that, but we won't actually get that until next year. So this is just showing that we're decreasing it out of that fund, but we did increase it in the REIT 2 fund. So we're going to spend the money out of REIT 2, and then the grant will reimburse that fund. The only other change in the ordinance was to a beginning fund balance in Fund 111. That's the drug seizure fund, and it was just due to a typographical error that occurred during the last budget amendment. The beginning fund balance was supposed to be amended to $86,872, but it was amended to $868,725. So this is just corrected in that amendment. There's no real change in that. And this is just looking at our staffing. These are all the different positions that were brought forth to council through the year, the changes, and those are listed in your staff report. We eliminated one commander position to create the deputy chief position, eliminated the senior accountant position to create the finance manager position, changed the planning supervisor to a planning manager, and then we reclassified the assistant planner to associate planner, and the plans examiner building inspector to a plans examiner. And then the other two we just spoke about recently during our conversation on ARPA funds, and that was adding the accountant for the grants, capital projects, public works assistance, and then the increase of the HR specialist position from part-time to full-time using the ARPA funds, and then we added in the temporary part-time policy analyst position. And so those are all the ones in turquoise. So there's a little key at the bottom that kind of tells you what we're doing. And this is just all the changes for the budget amendment number 2. So the amendments cause a reduction in total ending balance of $786,000, but $781,000 of that is that beginning fund balance error. So only approximately $5,000 is from requested changes. So this is just a review since this is a workshop meeting. So just review and recommend go ahead and sending the ordinance to the consent agenda if there's no additional questions or changes between now and when we bring it forward next week. So if you have any questions, let me know.
All right, does anybody have any questions on the budget amendment? All right, seeing none, I guess we'll take that over to the consent agenda.
Okay, thank you.
And last but not least is a discussion item that Jean is going to be handling, a discussion of the Visitor Information Center. Go ahead, Jean.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is kind of a housekeeping matter. We typically go through all of our contracts before they expire. So every year we go through them to see where we're at. And right now we're going to talk about the Visitors Information Center, but along with that, we'll talk about the Chamber of Commerce contract. The Chamber contract is actually up December 31st of this year. And currently what they pay is $250 a month. And then they get a credit of $150 a month as a result of a bunch of tenant improvements they did a number of years ago that really brought that building up to a current code and a usable condition. So they right now through the end of the year, they are paying the $100 a month to the city. Now with the Visitors Information Center, we actually pay the chamber to operate that for the city of Lake Stevens. We get benefit from that. So we pay the chamber $1,500 a month to provide that service to the city. That particular contract runs until such time the city or the chamber, actually the city, excuse me, want to discontinue that operation of the Visitors Information Center. If the city chooses to do that, we have to give 120 days notice before we discontinue that. So this evening, I had emailed out just before the meeting. Matt from the chamber was able to send over some information. Bear in mind that during all of last year, because of COVID, the center was shut. So we really don't have any numbers to show you of how many people came in, what type of questions and that type of thing. The other factor we have is currently part of the Visitors Information Center is rented out to the state of Washington, and the Senator Hobbs actually utilizes that space, but the agreement is with the state of Washington. And recently, Senator Hobbs is being promoted or moved into the Secretary of State position. So we're uncertain if he will need that office space any longer. And I want to say that comes in around $200 a month for that space rental. So that's what I have before you this evening. One of the things I would propose is if we extend the agreement with the chamber, I would propose we look at the lease amount, and we could either utilize the state numbers that they provide us for their contract and do the math per square foot and come up with an updated number for the chamber, or we could go through our broker and see what the average cost for commercial space is. I believe that'll be extremely high, and I would propose that if we did that, we would just use that as kind of information. But in my mind, the chamber does provide a useful purpose for the city and the community. So we want to take that into consideration when coming up with the new lease rate. I'm open for questions.
I went to unmute and I clicked on your picture, Jean. It didn't work. Okay, Mary, go ahead.
Yeah, one of the things that I was so impressed with in the rapid time I had to look at what you sent us, Jean, was how much of a service they are doing by giving the public information that we could get if we had a newspaper, which we do not have. It's a great resource for people to find out more about Lake Stevens. And that is no question about it. That's very valuable to me. I think that's great. And I wonder if we can embellish that in some way. I'll have to talk to Mr. Tabor.
And I appreciate that. I had that exact takeaway when I went through those documents he provided. And I'm really curious now that we have Dawn working for the city of Lake Stevens and putting out the week's wrap up. If that's made a difference in what the statistics would show today, as far as how many people come in asking questions that they're not finding on the city website.
Maybe, not sure.
All right, anybody else? Nope. Okay, so the takeaways from this is we're looking at a new lease for the chamber, whatever that amount is going to be. And I guess that the chamber is still running the visitor information center as, the city hasn't done anything with that yet. So I guess we just continue that, right? Okay, so looking forward to that. That has to be done the lease needs to be done before the end of December, correct? So we're looking at bringing that in December's meeting.
Correct. And I think what I would be a champion of is just using the lease rate that the state of Washington provided for the Senator Hobbs space. That's what they pay for all those type of spaces. And it does, help the community. So that seems pretty representative of what the space should be. So I did some quick math, and I think you're going to be looking at a $500 to $700 a month payment versus the $250 that was in the agreement. So that's kind of where I think we'll land.
Okay, any other questions? Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you. I was just wondering, how long does that credit for the $150 for those improvements? How long does that run for?
That ran out. It runs out on December 31st this year.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody? Any other discussions on any other topic for the good of the council?
I would just like to say, Councilmember Daughtry, that the city staff will be bringing back the topic of SR 204 and Highway 9 landscaping. We're trying to get documents from WashDOT. We've received some, but we want to put a nice presentation together for council. So that hasn't been lost. It's still on our radar.
Okay. All right. I'd like to bring up one other thing. Last week, Angie and I think the mayor had a discussion about the pet licensing fees. I would like to let everybody know that there has been some chatter on Facebook about pet licensing, and it was really not it didn't revolve around the fees. It actually revolved around how many pets you can actually have, and if birds, reptiles, fish, had to have a license. It is clear in the ordinance that none of that, hamsters, gerbils, they don't need a license. It's only cats and dogs specifically called out in the ordinance. The ordinance states that you can have 3 animals in any combination, cats and dogs, 3 of any of those combinations over 6 months old, and they have to be licensed, each individual one. And you have 60 days after, or 90 days, I think, after coming into the city from annexations. There's several other things in there. Part of the conversation that I'd like to do, along with what Angie was discussing last week, which was why are we even doing pet licensing when there is, when most pets, quote unquote, most pets are chipped now. The license, we talked also with the chief, and the chief said that they really can't be sure that everything is chipped. So how the heck do we have a loose dog? How do we find out who the owner is? So that's what that is all about, is that the licensing is only so that we can, as a city, hopefully get the animal back to the person without having to go to the shelter, because it costs them a lot more money to get them out of the shelter than it does to license them. So that might be a piece of the conversation we still might want to have. I was looking for the minutes of, it was back in 2017 when we last did the ordinance on pets. And I was trying to figure out why we had the limit of 3. I believe the discussion revolved around not having puppy mills and things like that in in the houses. And what makes me believe that is another part of the ordinance says that you can have a litter of puppies, but you have to get rid of them within 6 months. Or kittens for that matter. So anyway, I don't know if there's anything else we really need to discuss on this or look at it, but the questions are out there in the Facebook verse, and also Angie had the questions. So I don't know. It kind of depends on what we want to do. Recognizing the fact that if we want to open up that ordinance, that we're going to make the staff busy again on something else that might be frivolous. So I just wanted to bring up the subject. You guys, you can all think about it and see what you want to do. And I think that's all I had. Anybody else? Okay, well, I guess we will adjourn from this workshop.